Hi, everybody, and welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and my guest tonight is back by popular demand. It's none other than Dr. Doug Lisle. He is the Director of Research for TrueNorth Health Center and has published numerous articles in the scientific literature. He's the co-author of one of my favorite books of all time, The Pleasure Trap, and is in private practice conducting psychotherapy at the TrueNorth Health Center. Delightfully candid and warm, Dr. Doug Lisle is one of psychology's most innovative and curious minds, deeply dedicated to exploring the mysteries of human behavior from fresh, uncharted waters. His research in evolutionary psychology and its impact on health, happiness, and the pursuit of pleasure is generating critical acclaim. And tonight, Dr. Lisle is going to talk about self-esteem processes and weight loss. So please welcome to Healthy Living, Dr. Lisle. Thanks for coming back.
You bet. My pleasure.
Well, we had so many people listening live. I mean, people can listen live or they can listen afterwards as a podcast or on YouTube, but so many people listened live on your call, and there was so much feedback generated because they felt we went a little bit over, but they said, oh, they could have listened to you for hours because you really are probably the most brilliant mind in psychology today, but you know so much. It's so interesting because when you look at you, Dr. Lisle, you're what my mother would call a tall drink of water, and you wonder, how the heck is this guy, interested in weight loss,
Well, first of all, I'm the most brilliant psychologist at TrueNorth Health Center. That's as far as that goes.
And how many psychologists are there at TrueNorth Health Center?
There's one, and he's there part-time.
That's funny. But it's interesting because I did say something on the last Teleclass with you, and I heard it in a lecture you gave at the McDougall Advanced Study Weekend, where you said that this, at least for women, that the number one predictor of self-esteem is weight. And I'd love to know more about why that is because it's fascinating.
Well, I think we had this conversation before. I don't remember exactly where I read that data, but I do remember saying something like that, so it must be true. But the reason is that is the way self-esteem works, which is that what self-esteem is not very well understood by conventional psychology. So let's just take a few minutes to understand it. What self-esteem is it's a little bit of a misnomer because self-esteem is actually we describe it as a feeling about how you feel about yourself. But that feeling actually is generated by two different types of inputs. And one of the inputs is what people signal to you about how much they value you. And the other comes from within, a judgment that's within. But the primary thing that the nervous system is concerned about is actually what other people think of us. So this is where psychologists have long been confused. I want you to think about the following: that from the standpoint of evolutionary biology, there would be absolutely no point whatsoever to have a system that had a thing that we would call self-esteem, where the organism was passing a judgment on itself and that it had good feelings about itself or bad feelings about itself for various and sundry reasons. There would be no evolutionary advantage whatsoever to such a device, so such a device would never come into being. So you would not see that in a dog or an aardvark or a caterpillar.
I was just going to ask you if human beings are the only species that have self-esteem, because sometimes, like at least with dogs or even cats, it seems like some of them have greater self-esteem. Maybe I'm projecting, but sometimes it's just...
Yes. Mm-hmm. They do not have what we call self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
They have what we would call an esteem meter, and that's a different thing. Okay, so you have self-esteem is actually well. First of all, let's talk about esteem. So esteem comes from the French words that are involved in the concept meaning to value. So value something means you find it valuable, and and actually that it's subject to a process of evaluation. And processes of evaluation are, by definition, comparative. So gold is more valuable than silver, silver is more valuable than nickel, etc. Okay, so these are comparative processes. So when you like something, it means you value it, but when you love something, it means you value it more.
Mm-hmm.
And so so it's going to turn out that we value relationships by nature, and the reason why we value relationships is because the processes of human life involve trading or interacting and exchanging with other people. So in mating, those interactions are very complicated, but ultimately they involve, in theory or in principle across the evolution of our species, they involve DNA moving from the male to the female, and then the two of them actually share the evolutionary future together of their DNA inside of an offspring. And so they also share effort involved in trying to help that offspring be successful. So that's so they are trading and exchanging their efforts with respect to that process. And that's a very, very biologically expensive process to raise a human. It's not a biologically expensive process to raise, mosquitoes.
Mm-hmm.
And so male and female mosquitoes do not, quote, value each other. They don't, quote, love each other because there's no evaluative process that is so dire, and they are not doing an ongoing exchange process. And so they don't have those kinds of feelings that human beings have. So we value things that are valuable, and they are valuable because they are more valuable than alternatives. Okay, and that's why, for example, romance is the most discriminating, exclusive process possible. In other words, we are basically, ideally, we're saying that's the one that I want, and I want that one and nothing else. Okay, all right. Now, for friends, you have the same process where you value them and you are exchanging things. And there's a lot of things that you might exchange, but the most fundamental thing that you exchange with friends is insurance. So friends have an extraordinary characteristic that human beings have and animals have to a much lesser extent for important reasons, and that is that if there are two friends living in the jungle and one of them breaks their leg, the other one can actually do double duty for several weeks while the first one heals. Mm-hmm. And that may be somewhat costly to the second one, which it will be. In other words, it will slightly reduce the second one's likelihood of survival because during that period, they're likely to lose some weight. They're likely to get thinner, okay? They're going to take a few more chances. They're going to be working a little bit longer. They're going to be exposed to more predators. In other words, they will reduce their own likelihood of survival to a modest degree for the next 6 weeks. However, they will massively increase the likelihood of survival of the person that needs the help. So the person that needs the help may have gone from a 80% chance of death down to a 5% chance of death. So there's been a phenomenal biological profit, whereas the cost of that might have been reducing the likelihood of survival of the helper from 99.5% to 99.3%. So a very tiny 0.2% cost resulted in a phenomenal gain of the first person. Now, that biological profit is almost never harvested by other animals to any degree whatsoever. So to gazelle on the African savanna, if one of them breaks their leg, they cannot help each other.
Sure.
They're just out of luck. So as a result, they do not value each other the way human beings value each other. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because they are not potentially as valuable to each other. And so, so friends, human friends, can have phenomenal feelings towards each other that you will not typically see in the animal kingdom among unrelated individuals because of the potential value that they have for each other as insurance policies. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So now we have romance, we have friendships, and also romances can be friendships, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a third set of evaluative processes and relationships that we trade with, which is what we call trade.
Mm-hmm.
And we literally have, one person knows how to put a roof on a house and another person knows how to fill teeth. It turns out that it's extremely useful for those two people to just exchange. And so one of them says, I'll put a roof on your house if you'll, put fillings in my teeth. And neither one of them could do the other one's work. And so by virtue of the division of labor and the division of skills and abilities, human beings are able to massively increase their standard of living as a result of trading. And so it turns out that this is a natural property of human beings to do this. And human children start to show spontaneous trading at the age of 2. Whereas you cannot get a chimpanzee to trade, they won't do it.
Interesting.
So a chimpanzee that loves bananas and they like oranges, they've got a bunch of oranges and you've got a bunch of bananas, and you try to give it a banana, but you want to exchange it for one of their oranges, they will not do it. So they will try to steal your banana and keep their orange.
Well, that's probably smart, huh?
Yeah. So these comprise these 3 major trading processes that human beings do. They trade for romantic partners, they trade for friends, and they trade for in trade process or business process. So those are the 3 things that people do. The 4th type of relationship that people have is with family, and family I mean like blood relatives. So if you have a child, then that child, you are not actually trading with that child. So it's a sort of a special relationship. But the 3 other types of relationships that form the core of human evaluative processes, social process, those 3 things have to be competed for. So they are actually competitive processes, which means that the people on the other side of those trades are running cost-benefit analyses on you. So if you're a person seeking a romance, the people on the other side of that are running cost-benefit analysis and trying to understand what you bring to the table in terms of both assets and liabilities. And so they simply run their cost-benefit on you while you're running your cost-benefit on them, and you're trying to decide whether or not you want to trade. The same thing is true with friendships, and the same thing is much more blatantly true in commerce. So if you try to get a job, they are trying to find out, what they have to pay and what you have to give, and that isn't enough to decide the issue. They have to then decide whether or not you are a better trade than their alternatives are, and you have to decide whether or not if they offer you the job, whether you can get a better exchange with somebody else. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So all human relationships are sitting under competitive pressures, with the exception of family. You do not have to compete to be somebody's mother. Okay, you simply are their mother.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit different. Now, so it's going to turn out that in order to these competitive processes are decided effectively through advertisements. So people advertise their cost-benefit, essentially the value proposition that they are giving to the marketplace. So they do so by showing their resumes or showing what they can do or showing what a nice person they are at the little get-together, that they'd be a good friend, you know what I mean, or they show off their new hairstyle to demonstrate that they'd be a good potential mate. In other words, people are constantly signaling their value proposition to the marketplace. Now, it's going to turn out that in order to help the individual figure out whether or not they are being successful or they are giving the market what the market most wants, it turns out that what people do is they signal to each other whether or not they find the other person valuable. So you can think about this in terms of flirtation. people they flirt with each other as a method to signal that the other person is valuable. And so people do that same kind of thing, flirting in their own way, in friendships and in business relationships as well. So it's going to turn out that when these people send positive signals to you, then that you would be valuable, then then your nervous system kicks out a mood of happiness. So happiness comes from that, if that would be a trade that you might be interested in. If there's a trade you might be interested in, but the other person sends a signal that they are not interested, then it creates unhappiness. So most of human happiness is simply the direct result of what I'm going to call esteem signaling that comes from other people. Now, what it feels like to us, the name we give it is self-esteem.
Okay.
So we say, oh boy, well, she flirted with me. Well, that was good for my self-esteem. Or we say your ego. Okay. So we really use the term ego to say that that's a device that is sensitive to esteem signals. Okay. And that's a pretty good description of what the layperson uses the term ego for. That's not what quite the psychoanalysts use it for, but we don't care about them. So in terms of what we think of the ego more, instead of vaguely thinking of it as what I call an esteem meter. It's a meter that is watching and gauging the feedback that we get from other people. So when other people give us good feedback, our esteem meter recognizes it and creates moods of happiness. And when other people give us negative feedback, the esteem meter recognizes it and creates moods of unhappiness. And so, yeah, that's what, when most people say, oh, that was good for my self-esteem, they're really saying it was good for my esteem meter. Okay?
Okay.
Because it's not really self-esteem, because it's not being generated from within at all. It's being generated directly from esteem signals from other people.
Interesting. Yeah, okay.
Now it's going to turn out that that human beings, in order to compete with other human beings in terms of making their advertisements, they needed that esteem meter, because they needed to know when they were doing, like if you put a new hairstyle on and then suddenly people are responding to you as well, then that's the depressing feeling that comes with that tells you that you shouldn't do that you should change back to the other hairstyle, because you are losing market share. That's exactly what's for, essentially, advertising analytics. So happiness are essentially they are the result of a competitive analysis that your nervous system is running on the effect that you're getting from other people. Okay? Now, it's going to turn out human beings have methods to advertise in order to compete in these three primary areas. So if you think about the mating arena, it's going to turn out the primary methods of advertising in the mating arena are going to be, they're going to follow right along the line of the things that we see throughout the animal kingdom. So the animal kingdom, the primary method of advertising is going to be physical beauty. And so animals basically strut around and show their physical forms. And so beauty winds up being the greatest trump card that there is in the animal kingdom. And the same thing is true in human nature.
Wow, that sounds so superficial, though, doesn't it?
Well, actually, the truth is it's not superficial. Okay. Because the reason why it works that way in the animal kingdom is because beauty detection mechanisms that sit inside of all animals that use beauty, that use visual evidence, is what they're actually detecting is mutations. And so by looking at, when one aardvark looks at another aardvark, they're looking for irregularities in the body that suggest that there are mutations. and everybody has mutations that can be seen by, with the eyes if you're a species that uses eyes. Mm-hmm. And so human beings are extremely acute at looking for mutations in other humans. And so when you look at people, you are simply counting mutations. And when you count very few mutations, you find the person very attractive. And when you count a lot of mutations, you find them less attractive.
Well, is that why if someone sees somebody overweight, unconsciously they consider that a mutation, perhaps?
Actually, not exactly. It's overweight is actually I think it's stoking the same type of mechanisms, beauty detection mechanisms. You could be right, AJ, but I don't quite think that's what it is. I think that overweight is slightly different, and that is that overweight in women causes morphological changes that mimic pregnancy.
Ah.
And so as a result of that, when males see women that have excess fat stores, their mind unconsciously registers pregnancy. And men are designed by nature to be systematically unattracted to pregnant females.
Interesting.
Yeah. So so that's just, it's essentially indicating that the female could not possibly be fertile. And so that's why that's such a big deal. Now, women are quite different in how disturbed they are by fat on men. Some women are very upset about it, are very unhappy about it. Other women are almost, it's almost unimportant to them. So you can actually see a pretty big sex difference where males in general are much more affected by female weight than females are affected by male weight.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that would appear to have deep biological underpinnings around pregnancy detection.
Well, in the olden days, people weren't overweight, right? I mean, our ancestors, up through human history, there was no such thing as being overweight in the natural world.
No. Well, that would have been impossible.
Yeah.
So you got the no animal in nature is unless it's some kind of freak organism, no normal member of any species that stores fat would ever become overweight in its natural habitat. Now, as soon as you start to disturb the habitat, then you would, if you artificially disturb the habitat by human activities, then suddenly animals can get fat. So, and that's all that's happened in human beings, is that we have disturbed the environment in numerous ways, most importantly by food processing. Secondly, also by making the environment extremely benign, that requires almost no muscular effort in order to do everything you need to do to survive. So by making it essentially no exercise and high caloric food, those two factors have resulted in the weight problems that we see. And those weight problems, they dominate the issues of females in westernized society, because the females that are women that are simply doing what they're designed to do, which is to eat the most calorically dense food available and do as little work as possible physically, you're essentially following critical energy conservation parameters that are built in by nature. And if you do that in the modern environment, the vast majority of people wind up overweight. And when women wind up overweight, they wind up looking infertile. And when they wind up looking infertile, they're sexually unappealing to males. And they're sexually unappealing to males, males give them those esteem signals. And when they give them those, males give them those signals, it causes the women to feel uncompetitive, rejected, and depressed.
Wow.
Okay, so that is the chain of events that results in this problem. Now, it's going to turn out that there's a little bit more to understand about this that is going to be useful and important to us. So, human beings do advertisements. and they do advertisements through beauty. They do it through singing, which is characteristic of whales and birds and frogs. They also do dancing, which is characteristic of many species. They hold athletic competitions, which is characteristic of many species. In other words, they do also species, males in many species will fight for particularly excellent locations, for benign locations for nesting, and the bigger, stronger, more competent males will take the ideal nesting spots. Human beings, this is also true. So it requires a lot of talent and energy and cussedness to own a home in Beverly Hills or La Jolla, okay? And so those are choice nesting spots that required somewhere along the line genetic capability to do so. So if you inherited it, you may not be that fancy yourself, but somebody was at some point along the genetic daisy chain. Now, what's going to happen is that these are the things that human beings do to compete. Now, these competitive processes are made more effective through rehearsals. So it's going to turn out that people rehearse their beauty, they rehearse their athleticism, they rehearse their singing, they rehearse their dancing, and God knows they rehearse their houses. So home decoration, Home Depot was successful precisely because the rehearsal of display of homes is one of the most important things that people do. It is clearly a major signal in human nature for gene quality. Beauty rehearsal is huge. That's why fashion is huge. That's why cosmetics is a $1 trillion industry in the world for that very reason. The athletics is an unbelievably big deal to people. So you are seeing that human nature goes to tremendous lengths to rehearse its competitive displays. Now, it's going to turn out that rehearsals require, in order for them to be worth anything, they require a feedback mechanism. So you need some method to know whether or not your rehearsals are improving your displays. Now, you don't want to rehearse in front of people, and a lot of times you can't. But even if you could, you wouldn't want to, because you don't want them seeing that this was rehearsed, because it's actually fancier and better if it looks like it just came easily. So the great Hall of Fame defensive back Deion Sanders, when he went to the NFL Combine to be drafted, he showed up and looked like he wasn't even planning to run. And I believe that this was actually a staged event. He looked like he wasn't really even in the right track shoes, like he wasn't dressed and wasn't planning to run. And then he sort of spontaneously decided, like, well, what the heck, I'll just run. And then he ran an extremely fast time. The orchestration to make it look like I wasn't even trying that hard was a very important piece of the display. Okay? And so human beings will do this. You've heard 1,000 times, oh, that person got A's and they don't even study. Okay? In other words, it's extremely impressive to do something very well and not have rehearsed. Okay? So human beings are built to rehearse in private and to be, but they need a feedback system that, because they don't have other people, a little sample that is actually watching their rehearsals and giving them feedback. So human nature actually evolved a spectacular method for giving feedback to people. And that spectacular method is what I have termed the internal audience. So people actually have in their heads, they carry around with them essentially, I think Rodney Dangerfield called it the committee. And that essentially you essentially have a portion of your brain that is dedicated to building wisps of images of human beings that are actually observing you, and they are watching you as if they are real people, and they are pretty smart. In other words, they think the way real people would think as best you can tell, and they give you feedback as if they are real people watching your rehearsals. So when you clean up your house and put in a new piece of furniture, you are looking at it and you're thinking, wow, that looks really good. And you're looking at it as if you're looking through the eyes of other people. And when you do that, if you think it is a good display for you, it creates a mood of happiness. This is self-esteem. Self-esteem is
okay.
What's that?
There was just a little glitch in your sound. You were saying this is self-esteem. Is that what you just said? Okay.
That's what I said.
Okay.
So these little wisps of mythical people are the self. And what they are doing is that they are generating the very same kinds of signals that real live people are generating when they signal to you. In fact, the purpose of the internal mechanism to do this is to act as a proxy for the real live people that matter. So this is what self-esteem is. Self-esteem is not the same thing as esteem, but it feels exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
They are both social psychological processes, that one of them is coming from mythical people from within, the other is coming from the actual people on the outside.
Wow.
Okay.
So when you hear somebody say, oh, that person has high self-esteem or that person has low self-esteem, so that's their internal audience's opinion of them?
Right.
Okay.
The internal audience is giving them feedback.
I see.
Okay. Now, now it is possible to have high esteem from the world and low self-esteem from within.
Oh, that like celebrities. There's some celebrities like that. Yeah.
Absolutely, they are. Okay. The reason is that the internal audience is actually watching the person 24/7, and they are actually determining how good a job they think the person is doing. And if it turns out that the internal audience is determining that the person is actually doing a mediocre job, then the internal audience will be ruthless in giving the person negative feedback, even though the external world could be giving them phenomenally positive feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because the internal audience is actually privy to inside information. Because they're not being fooled by the advertisement.
Yeah.
They know, the internal audience knows what you're capable of doing, and if you do a mediocre job, they're going to give you mediocre feedback. And if you do a great job, they're going to give you very good feedback. In fact, if you do a great job and they give you very good feedback, they can be giving you very good feedback in the teeth of total rejection from the rest of the marketplace. Okay? So this is the critical difference in understanding self-esteem versus esteem.
Okay.
And it's very important to know that self-esteem mechanisms are actually there. The only reason they are there is to help you ultimately shape your rehearsals so that your advertisements get better so that you can actually get esteem. That is their biological function.
Okay.
Okay.
So
now it's going to turn out that understanding that this is true is critical for helping people do some of the diligent efforts that are required in order to become more competitive. So let's talk for a minute about what goes on I'm not talking about 100% of people, but I'm talking about 90% of people with respect to weight problems.
Okay.
So let's walk through the minds of somebody that's struggling with a weight problem. They're struggling with a weight problem because they get signals from the outside world that tells them that they are not particularly attractive. So it could be that they get those from potential mates, or they might be getting them even from potential friends. So people might consider them less appealing as a result of their weight problems, because friends even are analyzing each other for friendships on the basis of personality characteristics such as conscientiousness and emotional stability and intelligence. And if a person is 50 pounds overweight, something that people infer is that there must be something wrong with you. Okay? And as a result, people are discriminated against as if they have psychological troubles or limitations that they don't have, simply because they've got a weight issue. It's also true that they could be discriminated against in business for the same reason, because looking at a slender person versus an overweight person, the employer might think, well, the overweight person might not be as conscientious or emotionally stable, or they may be lazier. See what I'm saying?
Right.
So they make inferences that are not in fact true, but those inferences are being stoked by essentially Stone Age disturbance that the person is out of physical shape. And so as a result, there's widespread discrimination, not only in the mating arena, but also in friendship and in business processes. So as a result, the person is getting a lot of low-grade, negative, it could be acute, they could be very lonely and frustrated with their inability to get any positive mating feedback. At any rate, their esteem meter is taking on a lot of negative feedback. Now, so they're motivated by this feedback from the marketplace to do things. So they do Atkins, and they start at the gym and whatever. And what happens is that as they spend the first, several hours trying to work on the problem, they do not detect any improvement. In other words, a week later, if they've lost a pound, it turns out that nobody can tell.
Sure.
So the marketplace does not change its feedback with respect to your advertisement. So there is the motive force is basically telling you must be doing the wrong thing. It's not working. Okay? The internal audience looks at you and says, well, we are aware that you've tried this before and you've failed before. So we don't think that you're going to keep this up. And so we don't think that this is going to work. And so even if you put a little bit of effort out the first 2 or 3 days, the esteem, the internal audience is basically unimpressed. And the internal audience basically yawns and says, I don't think this is going to work. And so the person's self-esteem mechanism is not reinforcing this behavior, nor is their esteem meter pulling any data from the social environment that says anything. And in fact, if the person tries to get some esteem from the social environment from doing this, they'll say, well, I'm on a new diet. Other people just kind of roll their eyes. They're like, well, I've heard this from you before. And so what we see is that the esteem mechanism is not set up to deal with this problem. This problem will checkmate motivation almost all the time. Now, so what do we do about this?
Right.
Well,
that's probably what everybody wants to know.
Right. So first of all, we have to understand that, and you cannot escape this, that the way your esteem mechanism is built is that you are desiring positive feedback from other people. So this is what your brain is built for. Your brain is scheming, fantasizing. It is attempting to trying to impress other people. So rather than act like we're above this and act like we don't care or anything else, the first thing we do in legitimate psychology is to get real. And to get real is to understand that as a human being, you are designed by nature to care about what other people think. That is the whole point. Your happiness depends upon feedback signals from other people.
Really? Because so many
And
people say, well, I don't care what people think. Is that just a crock of BS when you hear people say that?
totally.
Okay.
It's an 100% crock of BS. Now,
Okay.
the truth is that they may legitimately say that I don't care about what a hell of a lot of people think,
Mm-hmm.
but they absolutely care about what a select group thinks.
Okay.
In fact, their happiness is dependent upon what that group of people thinks.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And those people are anybody that they would want to mate with, anybody
see.
that they would want to befriend, and anybody that they would want to be employed by.
I see.
Okay?
Yeah.
So they absolutely care what the market thinks. They are designed by nature to do so. And if they don't, they have severe autism, and we're not talking about those people.
Okay.
Okay? Now,
yeah.
so now the issue is that people's feelings about the weight process are very much tied to daydreaming and hoping, waiting for the one day when they suddenly are getting positive feedback signals from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And what we must do is we must try to separate this process from that fantasy. And so we can do this to some degree if we understand that this is what we must do. What we are going to do is we are going to realize, we are going to concede the fact that we will not be getting esteem signals from other people anytime soon.
Okay.
That the normal motivational process of guiding our behavior by modifying our advertisements in response to feedback from other people will not apply to this problem. Okay?
Okay.
That makes this a very unusual problem for human nature, which is why it's the problem of our age.
Yeah, I mean, the more and more people keep getting overweight too. I mean, there's something
Right.
like more than 3/4 now, and more than half of those are obese. So the problem's actually getting worse.
Yeah, well, it's going to get worse because the energy conservation programming inside of human beings is going to keep driving them to do less effort, which they can get away with, and eat more and more concentrated food, which is more and more available in more and more enticing forms.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is going nowhere. It will reach some saturation point where every single person that is genetically susceptible to gaining weight is going to be at whatever that genetic equilibrium is, given the environmental circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to be a hell of a lot of people.
Yes.
Okay. Now, so this problem is not going away. Now the solution to the problem is going to be to be focused on the internal audience rather than the external audience. And the internal audience is who we are going to try to impress. And it's very useful to know that the internal audience can be impressed. Not only can the internal audience be impressed, it will be impressed. Okay? The internal audience will be impressed at the moment where the external audience would be impressed if they were to observe your actions. Okay?
Yeah.
So let's suppose that you are working on a new set of dance moves, and you're looking in the mirror, and you're working on them, and you're saying, they're kind of okay. Then you might even have a coach that comes in, and then she shows you how to move your body slightly differently in a different way, and then she goes away, and then you work on that, and then you're working at it, and then you one day, 3 weeks later, you're watching yourself, and you're like, hey, that's really good. Okay? That process is inevitable. If you work diligently at whatever it is, you will improve, and as you improve, the internal audience will signal esteem to your esteem meter. Okay? It will create a mood of happiness that has a specific tone to it that we call pride.
Mm.
Now, interestingly enough, that pride mechanism will only go off if you impress the internal audience in that way. You can't get it to go off really in any other manner. Very difficult. I mean, you can trick it a little bit. I mean, you can, for example, if you go buy a new I don't know, a new green Jaguar, and you can imagine that when other people see you in that Jaguar, they're going to be really impressed. So it will create a sense of pride.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But with respect to weight loss, the same type of process is going on, is that we're trying to build ourselves a green Jaguar. And as you go to diligent efforts, it will usually take several days for the esteem meter to start to be activated. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's talk about the things that actually activate the esteem meter with respect to weight loss most reliably. Eating a very healthy meal does not do very much.
Interesting.
Surprisingly.
Wow.
And let me tell you why. Because the internal audience is aware that very often you have followed up a healthy meal with a whole box full of tofutti cuties by midnight.
Sure.
Okay?
Well, you were so good, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is that it's not necessarily impressed by that. So it's going to turn out that with respect to weight loss, the esteem meter's mechanism that is most reliably associated with increases of self-esteem signaling turns out to be exercise. Because exercise you cannot get back. Once you have worked out hard and diligently, you cannot then go the other direction and not work out. You did it.
Yeah.
And your internal audience knows for a fact that you did it, and it cannot forget that you did it.
That's fascinating because you know, a lot of times you'll hear, at least in the plant-based world, that, you know, how diet trumps exercise, and a lot of people think, well, it's not even necessary.
Yeah, well, it's a big mistake to leave this out, because it's the most important potent mechanism we have for the esteem mechanism.
That's really amazing. And everybody can do something, you know, like I've interviewed people on the show that talk about just getting a pedometer and walking one step more each day than they did the next day. And there was an example of a lady that was in a wheelchair that's now walking, because that's literally what she did, is one step more every day.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Now, it's a good thing to do the following. It's a good thing to actually push yourself a little bit. Okay? So, in fact, as long as you're not in pain, and you don't have physical limitations, you should push yourself fairly hard. Now, if you're haven't been exercising at all, you want to be a little bit careful. But as you go on and the body adapts to some exercise, within a couple of months, you should be pushing yourself fairly regularly, fairly hard. The reason is that the internal audience knows whether you're pushing very hard. So if you do a half-assed job, it knows you did a half-assed job. So even if some intelligent doctor were to tell you, well, that's all you really needed to do to maintain your fitness pretty well, and it was good for your body, that would be true. But your internal audience would know that you hadn't pushed into the progress mechanism very hard, because you didn't actually push yourself. Okay? But if you push yourself, your esteem meter knows you pushed yourself, and it will give you a pride signal as a result. Okay?
Yeah.
So now, not only that pride signal now helps to actually support you as you try to do a better job with the eating too.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to not do is drown in the futility that comes with trying to do a pretty good job with respect to the food, not getting enough change from day to day in what we look like, that the signals from other people do not change, and therefore we say, what's the use? Okay? So that's what will happen if all we're doing is essentially focusing on feedback from other people, and then just trying to change our diet. There is not strong enough of an esteem signal that comes from within, because just being a good girl or a good boy and staying out of the shit for a few hours is not enough to do it. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to, there are traditions in psychology and in, and in actually world philosophy and religion that try to tap into this and have a sense of this. They're kind of like hound dogs that have sniffed it, but they of course haven't analyzed it. They don't know exactly what chemicals any more than the hound dog knows about what's going on. So in the Buddhist, world, in the meditation world, that's sort of the notion of trying to essentially divorce the process from the outcome, like trying not to be thinking about the outcome. That's a nice idea in theory, but of course it cannot be done. And it cannot be done because human beings have a four-brain bundle that as they are trying to not think about what it is that the outcome of this thing is, they must think about it because they're wired by nature to think about the outcome. So you're wired by nature to be integrating what it is that you're doing today with some long-term plan. And your long-term plan of losing weight is involved in trying to get more esteem signals from other people. Okay? So you cannot shut that off, and we shouldn't try to shut it off. But what we should try to do is understand that what we are really trying to focus on is becoming very sensitive to the self-esteem mechanism, where the self, or the internal audience, is signaling to the esteem meter whether or not we deserve pride for what we've done. And once we start to get used to the fact that you have to understand your intuition is that the only way you're going to feel better about yourself is when you actually win the game and other people give you positive feedback. And what I'm telling you is that is not true. That remember that in principle, we really wouldn't give a shit about anything in this world as long as we could be happy. Like, what would we really care? Okay, about any external feedback, about anything, as long as we were actually having moods of happiness in the system. So what we're really seeking is happiness. And one of the ways to get to that happiness is to have the self-esteem mechanism be feeding pride signals to the esteem meter. Okay? And it turns out that we can actually get there way faster than we can lose 50 pounds. Now, it's useful to know that you can probably get there within a week or less. That in probably 5 or 6 days, diligent enough behavior will start to impress the internal audience, because the internal audience will say, wow, you're starting to impress me now. Okay? And so the tremendous burden of all of the negative signals that we get from other people and from the mediocre signals we get from the internal audience will start to wash away as the internal audience starts to give you a major thumbs up and applause as you do an excellent job day by day. Okay? This is what we need people to get addicted to. We need to get them addicted to their own internal positive feedback.
Wow.
Okay? Now, there is nothing like, and I will admit, there is nothing like the positive feedback that comes from other people.
Yeah.
And that is because the system is actually designed to be highly reactive and responsive to that feedback, because they are the most important thing in the universe to you, not your internal audience. Okay? But if we can supplant them and understand that we need to supplant their judgments for a while, that we need to put them on hold and understand that the most important person you need to impress is inside you. Okay? If we do that, you can lift the great burden of this esteem problem from within people and get them moving the right direction and get them happy long ahead of any positive feedback from the marketplace.
Wow. So what's the
Does that
first
make
step?
sense?
Yeah, it does. It's fascinating. I'm going to have to listen to this again, but what is the first step? How do we get people started?
The first step is to break down what you need to do in terms of daily practice. So the daily practices are exercise and some simple dietary things. So we know that we have to, we know some things that we want to do. So I have a little checklist I give people. The checklist has 6 things on it. I call it starch targets. So starch, salad, fruit, exercise. Those are the 6 targets that I have for people. And I want them to have a check sheet, a weekly check sheet, where each day they're attempting to hit those 6 targets. And the goal, as we begin, is to hit 34 out of those 42 targets in a week. So my goal is for them to hit 80% of those targets. So you may not get it every day. You may not get a salad every day. You may not exercise every day. But your job is to think each day. My job is to try to hit those 6 targets. Okay? And what we want to do is have that. We have now broken this thing down into the very methodical sub-goals that we are trying to accomplish. And when we exercise, very quickly, I want people to exercise to the point where they are at least moderately uncomfortable. Yeah.
Okay. And so what would that be? And do you think that somebody that's maybe significantly overweight should get clearance from a doctor first before they just start out exercising?
I'm supposed to say that. If you're going to post that on the internet, I have to legally say that that's true. So probably. Okay. That seems to me to be incredibly stupid. The truth of the matter is, if you're really overweight and you haven't done much, then start doing more than you've done.
Right.
Okay. So if all you've done is walk to the mailbox and walk to the mailbox twice, obviously I don't think we have to run to the doctor to learn which hand to put our toothbrush in. So be smart about this. Everybody that's listening to this is plenty smart enough. Don't go out there and get yourself into trouble. I don't try to swim like Rip Esselstyn. Rip Esselstyn goes for a swim, and he jumps in the ocean with sharks. Goes for 3 miles. And when I swim, I wade slowly into my backyard pool. I paddle around for 10 minutes. That's a swim. Yeah. Okay, so everybody, set your own limits for what's good for you, and but push yourself a little bit routinely. And when you push yourself, you will feel in the hours that follow, you will feel that esteem meter looking at you from the inside saying, well done. And I want you to get very aware that that's why that's happening and that we want to stoke that mechanism as often as possible.
Thank you so much for listening to Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious.